Hello, everyone. This is Shreedutt Kamat. I work with the United Nations Development Program as a state project officer for the state of Maharashtra for disaster risk reduction. And today I'm going to talk to you about a topic that I'm deeply passionate about, which is disaster management. So, what does the word disaster actually mean? What are its origins? Disaster, as you can see, has its roots in the belief that the position of the stars influence the fate of humans, often in destructive ways. Its original English meaning was an unfavorable aspect of a planet or a star. The word comes to us from the Middle French and the Old Italian word disastro, from the Latin prefix dis and astro, which means stars. It basically means that in olden times, it was believed that the unfavorable movement of the stars are what causes disasters. The modern definition, though, is much more comprehensive. It tells us that a serious disruption of the functioning of the society, causing widespread human, material, or environmental losses which exceed the ability of the affected society to cope using its own resources, what a disaster is defined as. In other words, when there is a disaster such as a flood, and the society cannot cope with the situation on its own, it has to call for external support, and such a situation has caused widespread human losses like deaths, has affected property, or caused environmental losses, then we call such a situation as a disaster. If we were to classify disasters, we would classify them basically into two types: natural and man made. Natural disasters are the ones that we frequently hear about: floods, earthquakes, tsunamis, which are caused naturally. And the others are the man made disasters, which are the consequences of human actions. If we were to classify them further, we would classify them as hydrological and climatological, which means floods, cyclones, hails, storms, lightning, heat waves, cloudbursts, drought, which are basically climate induced. The others are the geologically induced incidents such as earthquakes, tsunamis, mud flows, and dam bursts, accidents, which include road, rail, and industrial accidents, and finally, chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear accidents. I want to talk to you about the disaster management circle, which tells us if you start from disaster impact, we start with the response, followed by recovery, reconstruction and development, prevention, mitigation, and preparedness. If I were to explain this cycle to you with an example, let's assume, and God forbid, that a flood has affected your school. So that is the point of disaster impact. So, what will be your immediate response? The immediate response would be to ensure that all students are evacuated safely and are sent back home. That would be response. Then you would look at recovery and reconstruction and redevelopment, wherein you will ensure that the school is again made clean, the water is pumped out, the drainages are cleaned. Then you would look at prevention and mitigation, which would mean long-term measures to ensure that such a situation does not arise again, which would mean you would either elevate the school or you would improve the drainages, make them wider. And then finally, preparedness, which would mean that if such a situation were to arise again, what would you do to ensure that your response was good? You would then see to it that you're in contact with the local agencies on a frequent basis. You would ensure that students are trained on how to evacuate in times of an emergency. And then again, if there were a disaster, the whole circle would begin. So hence, these are the phases of a disaster, and this is what we call the disaster management cycle. Just to give you a bit of food for thought, I will talk to you about the economic losses due to disasters. If you look at 2007 to 2021, you can see that every year billions of dollars are lost due to disasters alone. In 2011, we had a loss of $615 billion, and in 2021, $343 billion were lost due to disasters. If we talk about India alone, the Indian economy lost about $87 billion into 21. After I finish this presentation, just look it up and see how many zeros those are. And since 2021, since 2001, I'm sorry, a total of 100 crore people have been impacted, and nearly 83,000 people have died due to disasters in India. If the losses are adjusted with the current prices, it comes to 13 lakh crores or 6% of our entire GDP. Just imagine that. In converse, if we were to mitigate disasters and take up steps to ensure that the losses of disasters are controlled, we would save $13 on every $1 invested in mitigation. Now, coming down to the actual presentation in terms of what I want to talk to you about, I'm going to talk to you about two disasters, how they occur, what are their types, and more importantly, what is it that we do to save ourselves. I'm going to talk to you first about earthquakes. Now, what are earthquakes? you must have all studied that the earth is made up of many layers, the crust, the mantle, and so on. So earthquakes are the natural vibrations caused by the sudden movements in the earth's crust, which is the outermost layer. So as you know, if you look at the world map, you will see that there are seven continents really, which make up the earth. And the tectonic plates push and grind past each other at the plate boundaries, and they generate lots of friction. Sometimes these plates tend to get upon each other, and the energy that would normally cause the blocks to move past each other is stored up. And finally, the stress builds up so much that the plates suddenly jolt back into place or into a new position. And this movement causes vibrations called seismic waves, which travel towards the earth, which cause the earth to quake. In other words, that is what an earthquake really is. Now, what are the effects of earthquakes? I'm sure all of you are familiar with those. Structural losses, which means buildings that are poorly constructed or non-engineered structures tend to collapse immediately. Gas and water pipelines get ruptured, which result in fires in most occasions. Earthquakes have also been known to cause landslides and rockfalls. Tsunamis, as you must be very aware, if the earthquakes happen on the ocean bed, then that displaces a large volume of water in the ocean or the sea, causing a tsunami. All the breakdown of communications happens since all the communications today are wired, these tend to be affected. And in a few rare occasions, we have also seen that due to earthquakes, the rivers themselves are known to change course, causing floods. Now, this is the most critical part for you because this is going to really tell you what to do during an earthquake. So, listen carefully. If you experience an earthquake, then don't panic, first of all. If you are inside a building or a house, the first thing is drop, take cover, and hold on to something that is firm and strong. There is general misconception that as soon as you experience an earthquake, you have to run out. That was okay if you were living in olden times and you had access to the open places immediately. Today, we tend to live in high rises and bigger houses. Hence, stop, drop, take cover, and hold on. That should be your mantra during an earthquake. Ensure that even in the immediate aftermath of an earthquake, do not take the elevator. Always protect your head and stay away from windows and anything that can fall. As I had mentioned earlier, gases, gas pipelines, and electric cables can tend to get damaged. Hence, turn off those switches immediately. If you're outdoors in the first place and if you experience an earthquake, then do not move from where you are. However, ensure that you are in an open place and away from any buildings, trees, and other utility wires which may collapse due to the earthquake. If you're already in an open place, ensure that you stay there until the shaking stops. The greatest danger exists directly outside buildings or any places where something might fall upon you. If you are inside a vehicle, ensure that you can just take the vehicle to the side of the road, stop as quickly or safely as you can. Again, ensure that you do not stop beneath a building or a tree or anything that might fall on you. As soon as you feel the tremor stop, proceed very cautiously and avoid roads and bridges because those may have been, the structural integrity might have been compromised due to the earthquake. If you are trapped, unfortunately, in the debris of some kind of a collapse, then do this. Ensure that you do not light a match even if you can, because that will suck out all the oxygen. Do not move or kick about too much because you will end up kicking up dust, which might suffocate you. Cover your mouth if you're with a handkerchief or clothing. Tap on the pipe of the wall so that rescuers can locate you. If you can, use a whistle if you have one with you. If you do not, then do not shout as a last resort. Shout only when nothing else is working because shouting will again cause you to get tired and inhale dangerous amounts of dust. So remember all of this. Moving on, the next calamity that I'm going to talk to you about is floods. This is actually the photo of a place called Ratnagiri in Maharashtra, where you can see that the flooding was so bad that these are the top of buses. That was the kind of level of water that had been accumulated during the time of those floods. Now, what are floods? Flooding can be defined as an overflow of water leading to a submergence or inundation that is of land that is generally dry, which means that the land we live upon is generally inundated during times of floods. Now, what are the causes of floods? Torrential rainfall, of course, being the primary cause. Happen in when they make landfall from the sea into the coastal areas. They tend to bring about a tidal surge inland, and that causes floods also. In the rare instance, there are dam breaks, which floods the population, and then ice and snow melting, and finally urban flooding, which is a new type of flooding because of the kind of concretization that has happened. There is no way the water can seep into the ground, percolation is avoided, and hence the water levels tend to rise when coupled with heavy rainfall. On the screen, you can also see the map of India, which is the flood vulnerability index. The red shows the places which are very highly susceptible to floods, followed by high, moderate, less, and very less. So you can see a substantial part of the country is actually quite highly prone to floods. What are the type of floods? As I mentioned earlier, coastal floods, which are caused by tsunamis and the kind of surge that follows a cyclone. Riverine floods are the most common type of floods, wherein the rivers flood its banks and then the water inundates the villages or the habitation along the shores. Flash floods generally happen in hilly areas wherein a large amount of water suddenly comes down the slopes and inundates the entire population. And finally, urban floods, which I just talked about. I'm going to show you some photos of the floods. This was the floods in Maharashtra in 2005-6, and you can show the kind of damages that have occurred. This was again in 2005, complete loss of agricultural land. Believe it or not, this was the city of Mumbai, where you can actually see the tops of the cars and you can see the level of inundation, at least 5 to 6 feet of water inundation in the city of Mumbai. This was the storm surge that I was talking about that was brought about by cyclone Nisarg in Maharashtra. Again, finally, to the last part or the most important part, as in what to do during floods. The first thing is be informed and do not believe in rumors, because in the times of social media today, a lot of rumor mongering goes around, and it would be very difficult for you if you start believing in everything that you hear and see. Hence, whenever you confront such a situation, ensure that you look at official sources on the TV, on the radio to get the right kind of information. Now, this is very important for you. When you see that the water has been inundated in the areas around it, do not walk through moving water. 6 inches of moving water can make you fall, and that can hurt you badly. If you have to walk in water, walk where the water is not moving. Use a stick to check the firmness of the ground in front of you. Here, I would like to quote an incident of a doctor in Mumbai who was walking along the flood water because there was no other recourse, and he fell down a manhole, an open manhole. His body was never found. So, I'm not telling you this incident to scare you, but to tell you the perils of walking in inundated paths and not knowing what is there, because you cannot actually see what is there beneath you in the muddy water. Hence, be very, very careful. Tell your parents do not drive in flooded areas. If flood waters rise around you, abandon the car and move to higher ground. There have been various instances where it does not seem that the water is deep or the flow of the water is slow and you can easily cross, but that can result in perils to your life. Hence, be very, very careful about that. You and your vehicle can be swept away very, very quickly. In the aftermath of floods, always ensure that your water that you drink is well filtered and boiled. The reason for this is all the water sources in floods tend to be contaminated with bad water. When the water level rises, it can enter wells, it can enter bore wells, it can enter your lakes from where the water supply is sourced, and all other your water sources can tend to be contaminated. Hence, whenever there are flooding in your areas, heavy rainfall in your areas, always ensure that your water is well filtered and well boiled. Well, that was it from my part. This was a short and a crisp presentation, and I hope you enjoyed as much as I like presenting it to you. Thank you, and all the very best for all your future initiatives.